Okay, so in the last session, we started with the implementation of the third experiment. This is your the SBLC Python lab session. And today we shall be continuing with the second program of the third experiment. So in the third experiment, we are supposed to learn object-oriented programming in Python. So we started with experiment 301, and we have written this program experiment 301.py where we have implemented a class. We saw how to implement a class. Then we saw what is the class variables. Then what are your instance variables and so on. Now, for the second part of this lab, we have the implementation of constructors. In the theory part, we have already done with this topic of object-oriented programming in Python. So in today's turn, we shall be implementing it, and we shall be seeing it that how do we do constructor implementation in Python. So this is our same class student, and we are keeping it same the way we had it for the first program of the third experiment. So we had the student class, then we had two class variables, number of courses and credits, and then we have a few instance variables, roll number, name, address, mobile. The same thing we'll be doing here now in the second program of the third experiment where we are implementing a constructor. So for your quick revision, a constructor is a special method of a class which is called whenever the object of that class is created. So whenever the object of a class is created, whenever an object of a class is declared, that time the constructor method is called, and it is called to initialize the object. So whenever we want to have some values into the object, instead of having some garbage values or instead of having any undesired values, whenever we think of having some predefined values into the object, so we want to initialize the object, so that time we define the constructor function. Now in Python, if you do not define any constructor function, so by default, a default constructor is provided to us. Okay. And a default constructor is a constructor which does not have any argument, any parameter. So you can have a default constructor, you can have a parameterized constructor, you can have a constructor which can accept uh, the object of the same class. So likewise, you can have. But in Python, as we have discussed in the last session also, or last to last session, that in Python, for every class, you can have only one constructor function, or you can define only one constructor function for every class. Okay. So now how to have multiple constructors in a single class? So that can be done with the help of either a parameterized constructor, or you can say uh, parameterized constructor with default values, or you can implement it with the help of passing n number of arguments to a method or to a constructor. And that can be done with the help of star args or star the k or whatever you want to call it. But it should be star that we already know that in Python, whenever you want to pass n number of arguments to any function, so that can be done with the help of star args. Okay. So with that, you can implement a single function, but that single function can be used for different kind of method call. For example, when you declare an object without passing any arguments, so the same constructor will be called. When you declare an object with multiple arguments, then the same constructor will be called, and so on. So how to define a constructor in a Python class? Every constructor, whatever is your class name, the constructor name would be double underscore init double underscore, double underscore init double underscore. So def is a keyword to define a function that we already know. And the name of a constructor function in Python is always dunder init or double underscore init double underscore. Okay, so that is also called as dunder init. So dunder init, and then the first argument is the self, and then the rest of the arguments as per our requirement. So this self would be implicitly referring to the object which has been created or which shall be used to call this constructor method. Then inside the constructor, we generally initialize the instance variables. So all these are instance variables: roll number, name, address, and mobile. So these are instance variables. So we are initializing the instance variable. Okay. So here you can see I am setting R to 0, then N to blank value, A to blank value, and M to 0. So instead of this, I can also write R equals to say none, a default value of R as none. Likewise, for this also, N as none, A as none, and then M also as none. So if no values are passed, so none values would be considered for this instance variable. Else, whatever value you pass to the constructor, those values will be used to initialize the instance variables of the instance or of the class, sorry, of the object. Then we have one setWell method to set the values. Then we have a getWell method to get the values or to return the values. Then the same class method for setting the courses, class method for setting the credits. And then we have the static method to check whether the given day is a working day for a student or not. And this implementation we already did in the last program, so that need not be explained again. I hope so. And then we have this driver code. So it is always preferred to put the driver code inside a function. So what I would be doing here, I would be saying that I have a function def main. This is my function. And inside this function, I would be putting this entire code. So let me select it and let me press tab. So my driver code goes inside the main function. And then after this, I would be saying if uh, the name of my package or uh, module, if the name of my module is under main, then I need to call this method main. Still, let me get the driver code from here. Let me put it in. So now this makes more sense. And so here we are creating an object S of a class student, and we are not passing any values. Likewise for S1 also. And let's see whether this works properly or not. Are we printing anything? If we are getting the value. Okay, so we are getting all these values of the object, and working day is false because I think it's the date of Sunday. Yes, let me change this date. This is 3rd of March. So yes, the working day is true now. It is a working day. And now what we'll be doing, we got two objects S and S1, and Let me not set any values for the object S1. So when we do not set any values for the object S1, let's see what output do we get. So yes, we are getting none values for the object S1, and object S2 has got the values set with it. So it has got the set values, and these are the courses and credits. So these are already set. That's why we are getting these values. And now what I would be doing, uh, let me pass some values to this constructor. So let me pass it as say 19 CO50, and then name, some name, Khan Aftab, and then say the location is Open Whale, and then the mobile number is something like this. So we are getting the values now, 19/050, Khan Aftab, and this is the mobile number, and these are the courses and credits which are already set. So now what's happening that at this point, our constructor is called with parameter. So we have the same constructor methods, this single method. So earlier for the object H2, sorry, S1, at this point, we are not passing any values. So since we are not passing any values, so the none values are considered to all these parameters, and it is initialized with the none value. Fine. But then we are setting the values of S1 using this setWell method. That's why these values are set. Otherwise, if I comment it out, and if I show you that way, so see here. For object S1, the values are none because we are not setting values and we are not passing any values at the time of object creation. But at this point, for 19CO50, if you see this line, so when we are creating the object, when we are declaring the object S equals to student, so at that very moment, we are passing some values. So the first value is the roll number, the second is the name, the third one is the address, and the fourth one is the mobile. So at this point, your constructor method would be called this constructor method. And what would happen? This self would be pointing to that object. Which object? We are creating S equals to student. So self would be pointing to S, or self would be referring to the object S. And then in this R, the roll number would be copied. That is 19/050. We are passing the roll number 19/050. So that would be copied into R. Then the next argument is the name Khan Aftab, that is getting copied into N. And then the third one is the address, that is New Panvel, so that is copied into A. And then the last one is the mobile number, which is getting copied into N. Okay. And then into this code, we are setting the value. So self.roll number equals to this R, self.name equals to N, self.address equals to A, and self.mobile equals to N. Okay. So when you pass the values, so those values are copied into this argument. And when you do not pass the values, so the none values will be copied to this argument. Fine. So in this way, your objects would get created, or the objects would get initialized with the given value, with the help of a constructor method. So this is how you can implement a constructor in a class. Now, can you tell me that if I want to do it with the Stara, so what should I do? Instead of going for this default values, or the parameters with the default values, what if I want to pass any number of arguments of any type? So how that can be done? Can you please let me know about that? Please post your answer into the chat box. Or you can even unmute and tell me the answer. Just come on fast. Then we need to start with the fourth experiment. which is about implementation of inheritance. Star arcs. Daniel says star arcs. So with the help of star arcs, we can have the definition. So how that can be done? What can I do? I can just comment it out. I can comment out this implementation of init, and here I can say star arcs, and then the first argument into this would be the object, or would be a reference to the invoking object, and then we have the different arguments. So here I need to check the length of this arg. If the length of my args is greater than 1, so it means that I have some arguments passed over it. So if that is the case, so in that case, we would say this. And instead of this cell, I would say arg of 0. Because arg0 is the reference to the object, dot roll number is then arg of 1, because the next would be the roll number, and then dot name would be the next 2, and then address would be next 3, and then this would be next 4. Fine. If this is not the case, so we would say arg of 0 dot roll number equals to arg of 0 dot name equals to arg of 0 dot address equals to arg of 0 dot mobile, all set to none. So we are setting all values to none if we have only one argument. So if the length is 1, so in that case we have only the reference to the object and nothing else. So in that case we would be setting all values to none. Let us see whether we are getting the correct answer or not. Let's execute it, and we should get the same output as we are getting earlier. Yes, we are getting the same output as we are getting it earlier. So this is working. Now, what we are doing, we are making use of star arcs to have a single method or single constructor to be called when you do not pass any argument, and to be called when you pass some argument. Fine. And this all depends upon your implementation, that how you are implementing it. For example, let's see that. Let's see this. If I say elif and I want to check for, there is a method called instance. Let me check. Yes, instance is there. And what this method would do, okay, so instance, and the first argument is the instance itself. So that would be arg of 1. If arg1 is an instance of my class student, What I'm trying to do here, see here carefully. I'm checking if there is a possibility of passing one object as an argument of the same class for the creation of another object. So it is some sort of copy constructor. So we are trying to implement the type of copy constructor over here, and let us see whether we can do that or not. So what I would be doing, I would be saying this, the same code. But now over here, my arg of one is another object of the same class. So I would be saying this arg of one dot name, and then arg of one dot address, and then arg of one dot mobile. So what we are doing, we are copying this argument 1 into argument 0. So argument 1 is an object of a class student. Argument 0 is the implicit object, obviously, of the class student. So this is something like copying a parsed object into this newly created object. Okay. We are trying to implement that. Let's see whether we can do that or we are in a position to do that. And before that, let me just execute the code. Let us see we are getting the same output or not. We are getting same output. No, we are getting some error. Elif instance tuple index out of range. Arg of one is an object of a student class. Just a minute, let me see. Is instance method. Oh, this is fine. Oh, no. I did a mistake over here. Can you point out what's the mistake over here? Yes, the one. If the length of the argument is greater than 1, then only I should check for argument of 1. Please hear carefully. If the length is greater than 1, then only I should check. What's happening if the length is not greater than 1? So I may get into else if, and then I'm trying to access arg of 1, which is not the case because I have only arg of 0, because the length is maximum equals to 1. Okay. So this should not be done like this. And instead, inside this if itself, I should have this condition. And the condition should be this if. If this is the case, Control V. See carefully what I am doing. I'm saying that if the number of arguments is more than 1, and if the argument is an object, then do this. And if the argument is not an object, in the else part, do this. And in this else part, so I do not need this now. And if the length is not greater than 1, then I would be going for this. Yes, fine. Now it should work. Let's see. So yes, we are getting the output as the earlier output. And now we need to check for this code. If the passed argument is an object. So how to do that? What I would be doing after this, I would be creating another object s2 equals to student. And now I would like to pass s1 to this. Or say I would like to pass s. Now see here carefully what's happening. What we are doing, we are creating an object s2 of a class student. And while creating the object, I am passing an already existing object of the same class student. Okay, s. So let's see whether the values of s are getting copied into h2 or not. And this can be done by printing the values. So print and get the values of h2. Sorry, h2 dot get well. h2 dot get well. So let's see. And yes, if you see this line, so this line is printing the content of h2 over here, this print h2 dot get well. So this is printing the content of h2. And what is the content of h2? It is the content of s, this first one. Okay. Now what I do, I pass the object s1. So now whatever is the content of s1, this is the content of s1. So this should be displayed over here if I pass object s1. So let's make a change, and here I write s1 and I save my code and I reinterpret it. I'm getting the output. Let's go to the last line, and then the last line says none, none, 7, 30, none, which is what? Which is the content of the object S1. Okay. So now we are successfully copying the content of one object into another object. One important technical stuff over here could be like to check the addresses of the objects, and let's see whether the two different objects into the same memory location or they are referring to different memory location. Why I'm saying this? Because both are having the same content. So here in this case, object S1 and H2 both are having the same content. So we would like to see the address, whether they are pointing to the same memory location or they are pointing to different memory location. How that can be done? I would simply say that in the get well, the last thing that we should return after this mobile, I would say return the ID of self. So return the address of this self, okay, or the address of the object which is calling. So now what would happen if I compile, if I reinterpret this code? After this mobile number and after this none, there would be the address. So comma and then the address of the object. So let's see that. So here we are getting the address. So this is my object S, this is my object S, same address. This is my object S1 with a different object with a different address as compared to S. And now this is our object S2. And if you see here carefully, so object S2, which we are displaying over here, is having the different address as compared to S1. Though the values are same, but they are different objects or they are referring to different memory locations. And if I create an additional object S3 by writing something like this, S3 equals to S1, and I display the content of S3 now, S3 dot get well. Now see what happens. So this is S2, this is S3. S3 is having the same content as S1, but at the same time, it is having the same address as S1. So S2 object is having different address as compared to S1, but S3 object is having exactly the same address as that of S1. Okay. So this is what happens when you make use of assignment operator for objects. This is a very important thing to understand. Please keep this in mind. So when you write like this, S3 will start having the same reference as S1. So it will be pointing to the same memory block. And so the content of S1 also becomes the content of S3. And both would be having the same address. But when we create an object like this, this is some exact replica of a copy constructor. And inside your constructor, if you have a setup like this, wherein you are checking whether the passed argument is an object of a same class. And if that is the case, then you are making a copy of that argument or that object into the reference object. So in that case, the addresses would be different. Okay. In that case, the addresses would be different. And so the S2, this object is having the different address as compared to this object S1. But the object S3 is having the same address as compared to object S1. Okay. So this is how you can play with the constructor, and this is how you can initialize your object in a required way with the help of a single constructor in a Python class. So this completes our second program of third experiment, implementation of constructor. And I urge you strongly to implement the constructor in multiple possible ways so that you learn all the different ways of implementing the single method, the single constructor method in a Python class. Then the fourth one is about implementation of inheritance. And we know that in object-oriented programming, inheritance is all about software reusability. So basically, there are two ways of having this software reusability or your code reusability. You can reuse your code with the help of importing the package or importing the module in your program, in your module or in your code. And at the same time, you can make use of inheritance, which is one of the default features of object-oriented programming. What happens in inheritance? We inherit the features of already existing class into a new class. What do? We inherit the features of already existing class into a new class. Okay, and that features consist of its properties and its behavior. I mean to say that features consist of all its class variables, instance variables, and all of its methods. So that we can do with the help of inheritance. How to do inheritance implementation in Python? Let's see that. exp401.py. Program 4.1, and this is about implementation of inheritance. To complete the theory part and all those stuff into it, And let's define a class, a person. So a person, now inside this, I would be first thing I would be having is my constructor, and let me have a constructor like this, and a person would be having a name, a person would be having an address, and a person would be having some contact details. So let me call it mobile. So name equals to none, then address A equals to none, and then mobile M equals to none. And then here I would say N, here I would say A, and here I would say M. Fine. So this completes my implementation of init method or the constructor. Then let me have a method to get the properties or to get the values of this. So I say get val. And then this would return self dot name and self dot address and then self dot mobile. Right? Let's have only these two things. And let me have my driver code in a main function. And let me create an object of a person class. And then let me print the values. If this is, if this module, if the name of this is main, if the name of the module is main, then only call the main method. Sorry, double equals to. Okay, so all none because we are not passing any values. Then let me pass some values. So suppose the name is Ahmad, location is, or the address is Mumbai, and mobile number is something. So now we got our object initialized with the given value. So this is the basic setup where we have one class and then we are creating the object of that class. Now what I need to have, I need to have another class which is deriving from this class. I mean to say there is a person which is a general class. Now you can think of a student who is also a person, then you can think of an employee who is also a person. So a student has a name, student has an address, student has a mobile. And beyond this, uh, a student has marks and a student has few other stuff also. But if you talk about employees, so the employee also has a name, employee also has an address, employee also has a mobile. But after this, an employee has an employee code, employee has a salary, employee has a department, employee has a job profile, and so on. So what I would be doing, I would be creating a student class, for example, and this student class is to be derived from a person class. So in parentheses, I would be writing the name of that base class. Okay, so this is the syntax of deriving a class in Python. Class keyword, name of your derived class or the new class, and then in parentheses the name of your base class. Okay, so student is derived from the base class. So now the properties of the base class becomes the properties of a student. So student would be having name, address, and mobile. So no need to redefine this. So apart from this, the student has got a roll number, student has got a marks and so on. So all those things we can have inside a student. So the first thing I would be doing is defining a constructor inside this class, and I would be passing the roll number, by default setting to none, and then I would be passing the marks or the pointer value. So say I'm passing SGPI. That is also set to none. And then inside this, I would be saying self dot roll number equals to R, and then self dot SGPI and index, oh sorry, a pointer, student grade pointer index, semester grade pointer index equals to SGPI. Now, what's happening that when you make use of a student, so we will not be separately making use of a person class. From the student class or from the student object itself, we want to access the properties of the person also. So when I would be passing the values to the object of a student, I won't be passing only the roll number and a SGPI. I would also be passing the name, address, and mobile. Okay, so we are passing name, address, and mobile also. Now, how to set these values, name, address, and mobile, which are coming from a base class. So to set these values, you need to call the constructor of the base class. How to call the constructor? The name of a base class, person, dot, the name of the constructor, that is dunder init. It comes here. And then passing the important thing. First is the reference of this class, reference of this object. Which object? The student object. So self, which is a name over here, self. Okay, so we are passing self. Then second is the name which we want to pass, that is n. The third one is the address that we want to pass, that is a. And then the last one is the mobile that we want to pass, that is n. Okay. So this n, this argument n we are passing over here. This argument a we are passing over here. And this argument m we are passing over here. So this way we are initializing the instance variables which are coming from the base class. And this way we are initializing the instance variable of the derived class, and this way we are initializing the instance variable of the base class. I can say initialize the instance variables of base class. Not of base class, but rather I should say from base class. Initializing the instance variable inherited from base class. At a time, inherited from base class. Okay. And then let me then define the get stirred. Get stirred will get me the student details. And here I would say return self dot roll number. I have this. Then I would return self dot name. I have this also. And then let me return only the SGPI. I can return all the variables, but let me return only SGPI. So this roll number and SGPI, this belongs to this class directly, and this name is coming from the base class. After this, we will declare the object of a student. And to this, if we do not pass any values, so let's see what happens. It should be all none. s.getStud. If I write s.getWell, so it will get me the values of name, address, and mobile only. So the first is a person class object. The second is your student class object, which is set to none. Now let us pass some values. So the first value is the roll number, say 19CO45. The second value is the name, say Sachin. And the third value is what address? So let's say Panvel. The fourth value is mobile. It will be like this. Then the fifth value is HGPI. So let me write 8.8. Okay. So here we are returning the roll number. So we got the roll number. Then the second is the name. We got the name. And then the last one is the GPI 8.8. So we are getting those values. So this is how a very simple way of implementing our inheritance in the class. And this is a very simple inheritance. We are having one derived class and one base class. You can have multiple base classes, so that would become your multiple inheritance. So comma base class 2, BC2, comma base class 3, BC3, comma so on. So this way you can have multiple base classes and your single derived class is getting derived from multiple base classes. So that becomes your multiple inheritance. Then you can have hierarchical inheritance. You can have one base class and then multiple derived classes. Then you can have multi-level inheritance. You can have hybrid inheritance. So all these inheritances are possible in Python. Okay. But you need to just ensure this whenever you have the constructor in your derived class and whenever you have a constructor in the base class, how to call the constructor of the base class. Base class name, dot operator, then the name of the constructor, which is always dunder in it. And then the first argument is always the self, and then the required number of arguments, or whichever arguments you want to pass, or whichever argument you want to initialize that you can pass over here, depending upon the implementation of your constructor in the base class. Okay. If you got multiple base classes, then this would be the first base class constructor. Then after that, the second base class constructor call, then the third base class constructor call, and so on. So this way you can implement inheritance in Python. I hope these things are clear. And if there is any query, please let me know. Meanwhile, let me stop the recording.